These are beautiful ships, and I don't say that lightly. The Queen Elizabeth class, the largest warships the Royal Navy has ever put to sea, proved themselves during the Carrier Strike Group 21 deployment in 2021, sailing from Portsmouth to the Pacific, conducting real combat operations along the way. That dual-island design isn't just distinctive, it's functional. These are genuine power projection platforms built to a world-class standard. But here's the thing. The most heated debate about this ship isn't about the ship. It's about whether the Royal Navy has enough destroyers and frigates to actually protect it. And when you look at the numbers, really look at them, the answer is no, not even close. To understand how bad this has gotten, you first need to know what a carrier strike group actually demands. A credible group, the kind that can operate in contested waters against a peer adversary, needs at minimum 1 to 2 air defense destroyers providing the outer missile shield, 2 to 3 anti-submarine frigates screening the approaches, at least 1 nuclear attack submarine ranging ahead of the formation, and 1 or more replenishment ships keeping the whole force fueled and armed. That's 6 to 7 escorts and support vessels just for 1 carrier. And those ships don't materialise out of thin air. When you commit them to a carrier group for months at a time, you're ripping them away from everything else the Royal Navy is simultaneously expected to do. North Atlantic patrols, NATO standing forces, counter-narcotics, freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, presence in the Gulf, support to the continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent. The arithmetic has to work for all of those missions at once, not just the carrier. So what does Britain actually have? 6 Type 45 Daring-class destroyers. That's the entire air defense destroyer fleet, 6 hulls. And a shrinking number of Type 23 Duke-class frigates, originally 16 ships when the class was fully delivered in the late 1990s, now whittled down through sales to Chile, decommissionings and withdrawals into extended readiness. HMS Argyle, the oldest, has been decommissioned. HMS Westminster was pulled from the deployable fleet. By 2024, the active frigate count had fallen to roughly 10 hulls, with further retirements scheduled every year as these ships blow past their designed 30-year service lives. And those hull counts? They're generous, wildly generous, because they hide the brutal reality of operational availability. To appreciate just how bad the Type 45 situation became, you need to understand what went wrong inside the engineering spaces. The WR-21 intercooled recuperative gas turbine was supposed to be revolutionary. A Northrop Grumman design that promised a step change in marine propulsion. But the WR-21s proved chronically unreliable in warm water operations. Total electrical power failures followed. Not partial degradation, not reduced speed, total blackout. Propulsion gone. Combat systems gone. Ventilation gone. A warship drifting in hostile waters with nothing but emergency battery backup between her crew and darkness. At least one widely reported incident left a Type 45 dead in the water in the Gulf. Dead in the water. And that wasn't a one-off fluke. Multiple ships in the class experienced variants of the same failure mode, and the problem was baked into the fundamental design of the propulsion plant, not something you could fix with a software patch or a replacement gasket. The entire class needed surgery. The Power Improvement Project, PIP, was the answer. And project makes it sound tidy. What it actually involves is retrofitting each destroyer with additional diesel generator sets. The engineering is invasive. Think of it as open-heart surgery on a warship. The patient survives, but she's off her feet for a long time. The programme has consumed years and taken hulls out of the operational fleet for extended periods while the work is carried out. Across a class of 6, in a fleet that can't spare a single destroyer for a single day, the maths is unforgiving. Every destroyer undergoing PIP is one fewer air defence destroyer available to escort a carrier, patrol the North Atlantic, or stand watch for NATO. On any given day during the PIP programme, the Royal Navy has typically managed just 2 to 3 Type 45s genuinely available for tasking. At certain low points, credible reporting suggested 1 or 2 operational air defence destroyers out of the entire class. Out of 6. When a single destroyer gets described as the mainstay of the fleet, something has gone catastrophically wrong with the maths. Combine the available destroyers and operational frigates today, and on a good day, the Royal Navy can put perhaps 10 to 12 surface escorts to sea. On a bad day, the number drops into single digits. The House of Commons Defence Committee published a report in December 2021, titled, with characteristic parliamentary understatement, "We're going to need a bigger navy." The committee confirmed the surface fleet had fallen to just 19 destroyers and frigates, already below what most analysts considered the credible minimum, and noted that actual deployable numbers at any given moment were considerably fewer. By November 2024, an assessment found the fleet's surface combatant strength standing at just 73% of what had previously been considered the minimum required. 73%. And that's the total fleet, not what's left over after you staff a carrier group. Now, about that figure that keeps appearing in comment sections and defence forums. 24 frigates and 12 destroyers. Where does it come from? It doesn't correspond to a single official recommendation in precisely those terms, but it reflects a broadly understood historical benchmark with real analytical foundations. The 1998 Strategic Defence Review under Blair set a planning assumption of 32 destroyers and frigates as the required surface escort fleet. That was already a sharp reduction from Cold War levels. During the 1980s, the Royal Navy operated well over 50 frigates and destroyers. But 32 was supposed to be the absolute floor. The minimum needed to sustain concurrent global operations, escort the carriers, maintain NATO commitments, and retain a war reserve. The 24 and 12 split reflects the rough breakdown that defence analysts and retired senior officers have repeatedly cited between anti-submarine frigates and air defence destroyers within that total. Where the number comes from matters less than where the actual fleet has gone. From roughly 35 destroyers and frigates in the year 2000 to about 25 by 2010, to 19 after the 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review gutted the fleet, to what may be as few as 15 or 16 commissioned hulls today. That's a halving of the escort fleet in 25 years. During the exact period when Britain brought 2 aircraft carriers into service that each need 6 or 7 escorts to operate safely. Think about that for a second. Really sit with it. Replacement programs exist, but their timelines keep slipping, and their numbers don't restore the fleet to anything close to the historical requirement. 8 Type 26 City-class frigates are on order from BAE Systems on the Clyde. Sophisticated, acoustically quiet anti-submarine warfare platforms designed to replace the most capable Type 23s. On paper, genuinely impressive ships. But the lead hull, HMS Glasgow, was laid down in 2017 and still hasn't been commissioned. Construction has crawled at glacial pace. Workforce constraints, supply chain disruptions, and a deliberate policy of maintaining a slow, continuous drumbeat of production to keep the shipyard workforce employed, rather than prioritizing delivery speed. Current forecasts push the last Type 26 out to the mid-2030s. 5 Type 31 Inspiration-class frigates are being built by Babcock at Rosyth. Cheaper general-purpose ships meant for patrol and presence, not frontline warfighting. And their schedule has also shifted right. The result is a widening frigate gap. Type 23s decommissioning faster than Type 26s, and Type 31s can replace them. Every frigate that leaves service before its replacement arrives is a permanent subtraction from the deployable escort pool, and the Navy has zero reserve capacity to absorb the loss. And it gets worse, because even if every one of those 13 replacement hulls arrived tomorrow, 8 Type 26 and 5 Type 31, the total is still only 13 frigates. That's 3 fewer than the 16 Type 23s they're replacing. The fleet isn't being rebuilt, it's being managed downward, and the replacement program itself bakes in a further reduction. This is exactly why the escort package for Carrier Strike Group 21, the single most important Royal Navy deployment in a generation, required significant Allied participation. HMS Queen Elizabeth sailed with 2 Type 45 destroyers, Defender and Diamond, and 2 Type 23 frigates, Kent and Richmond, plus an Astute-class submarine and Royal Fleet auxiliary support ships. But the group also included the United States Navy destroyer USS The Sullivans, the Dutch frigate HNLMS Evertsen, and embarked United States Marine Corps F-35Bs flying alongside British jets on the carrier's deck. Officially, this was a triumphant demonstration of Allied interoperability. And it was that, genuinely. But it was also, in plain operational terms, a necessity born of shortfall. The Royal Navy couldn't generate a full Carrier Strike Group escort from its own resources without stripping every other standing commitment bare. When those escorts are already stretched across the globe, the carrier stops looking like a force multiplier and starts looking like a resource drain. Not because of any flaw in the ship, because the institution that built her never funded the fleet to sail alongside her. Which brings us to something the previous video about these carriers never once mentioned. Not once. And several of you noticed immediately. Hypersonic missiles. If you're going to have an honest conversation about carrier survivability, you can't pretend this threat doesn't exist. Russia's 3 M22 Zircon reportedly flies between Mach 6 and Mach 9, with range estimates stretching from 300 to over 1,000 kilometers, depending on launch platform and flight profile. Moscow claims successful test firings from the frigate Admiral Gorshkov and from submarine platforms. Western intelligence counsels some skepticism about actual maturity, but nobody disputes the fundamental physics. A missile arriving at 6 times the speed of sound compresses the defender's reaction window from comfortable minutes to desperate seconds. China's arsenal is broader, arguably more alarming. The DF-21D, the weapon Western media labelled the Carrier Killer, is a medium-range ballistic missile with a manoeuvring re-entry warhead designed to strike ships at sea beyond 1,500 kilometers. Its bigger sibling, the DF-26, pushes that to roughly 4,000 kilometers. Both descend at hypersonic terminal velocities that may exceed Mach 10 in the final dive. China's also developed the YJ-21, an air-launched hypersonic anti-ship weapon observed on H-6 bombers, adding yet another threat axis. So, can the Royal Navy stop them? The Sea Viper system on the Type 45s, Aster-15 and Aster-30 missiles, cued by the Samson multifunction radar, is genuinely one of the most capable naval air defense systems operating anywhere. Samson tracks hundreds of targets simultaneously. Aster-30 engages threats beyond 120 kilometers at altitudes up to 25 kilometers. Against conventional subsonic and supersonic anti-ship missiles, it's formidable. But hypersonic maneuvering targets are a fundamentally different problem. Extreme closing speed, degraded radar returns during plasma sheath formation, unpredictable terminal maneuvers, all compressing the engagement window to margins that current interceptors weren't designed for. The honest answer, and it's the same honest answer for every Western Navy, is that nobody has publicly demonstrated a proven, reliable kill against a maneuvering hypersonic anti-ship missile in a real-world engagement. Upgrades are coming. An Aster-30 Block 1 NT variant with enhanced ballistic threat capability is in development. The Americans are investing heavily in directed energy weapons. But these are developmental programs, not mature solutions a fleet commander can bet lives on today. Here's the critical point, though, and this is where the conversation must stay precise rather than apocalyptic. Hypersonic missiles don't make carriers obsolete. They make the escort screen around a carrier more important than it has been at any point in the history of naval warfare. A carrier alone is vulnerable, and not just to hypersonics, to any concentrated attack. But a carrier inside a properly constituted strike group, with multiple air defense destroyers providing overlapping coverage, frigates prosecuting submarines before they reach launch range, airborne early warning extending the detection horizon by hundreds of miles, electronic warfare degrading enemy targeting. That carrier becomes a dramatically harder thing to kill. Layered defense works because no single system has to stop everything. Each layer thins the salvo, disrupts the kill chain, buys seconds for the next layer. A hypersonic missile still needs targeting data before launch. The kill chain, satellites, over-the-horizon radar, data links, is itself vulnerable to jamming, disruption, and direct attack. Every missing destroyer tears a hole in the umbrella. Every missing frigate lets a submarine creep closer to launch range. The answer to hypersonic missiles isn't fewer carriers, it's more escorts. And if you still think carriers are expensive relics made obsolete by precision weapons, explain China. The nation that has invested more than any other on Earth in weapons specifically designed to kill aircraft carriers is simultaneously building carriers at extraordinary pace. Liaoning, the refurbished Soviet hull, entered service in 2012. Shandong, domestically built, commissioned in 2019. Then the Fujian, launched June 2022, over 80,000 tons, fitted with electromagnetic catapults, the first non-American carrier to feature EMALS technology. A fourth carrier is widely reported under development. Billions of dollars. If carriers were truly obsolete, this would be the most expensive strategic blunder in modern military history. China doesn't think so. That should tell you something. Now, point defense. A lot of you had very specific frustrations about the original video, spending minutes on the Phalanx close-in weapon system without mentioning a single alternative. Fair criticism. So let's actually have that conversation. Phalanx is what the Queen Elizabeth class currently carries. A 20mm Gatling gun firing at roughly 4,500 rounds per minute, radar-guided, designed as the last line of defence against incoming missiles. It's been in service with the Royal Navy since the aftermath of the Falklands War and gone through multiple upgrades. But its limitations are well understood. Effective range of about 1,500 metres, meaning any target it's engaging is already terrifyingly close to the ship. Limited ammunition drum capacity, and against a supersonic anti-ship missile closing at Mach 2 or above, that translates to an engagement window of roughly 3 to 4 seconds. You're asking a stream of unguided 20mm rounds to physically intersect a crossing target moving at multiple times the speed of sound. The geometry is brutal. CRAM takes the same phalanx mounting and sensor package and replaces the gun with 11 RIM-116 rolling airframe missiles. Same footprint, dramatically different capability. RAM missiles have an effective range of approximately 9 kilometers, roughly 6 times what the gun achieves, and each one is a supersonic dual-mode guided missile with combined radio frequency and infrared guidance that gives it a high probability of kill even against maneuvering threats. The United States Navy deploys it aboard littoral combat ships and amphibious assault ships. Germany uses RAM extensively across its surface fleet. It's a proven system, widely deployed, and most defense analysts consider it a significant step up from the gun-based phalanx for dealing with modern missile threats. Then there's Sea Scepter. This is the one that changes the game entirely, and the one the Royal Navy is actually fitting to the Type 26 and Type 31 frigates. Sea Scepter uses the Common Anti-Air Modular Missile, CAM, with a range exceeding 25 kilometers and the ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously through a soft-launch vertical system. 25 kilometers versus 1,500 meters. That's not an incremental improvement, that's a generational leap. Sea Scepter can engage threats at ranges where the ship still has time to react, still has room for second shots, still has the geometry to protect nearby vessels in the formation, not just itself. So why doesn't the Queen Elizabeth class carry Sea Scepter? Because when the carriers were designed and fitted out, procurement decisions prioritized cost containment. The carriers were intended to rely on their escorts for area and medium-range air defense. Phalanx was the self-defense backstop. The escorts were supposed to provide everything else, which works perfectly if you actually have the escorts. When you don't, you've got the Navy's largest ever warship, defended at close range by a system that has served since the aftermath of the Falklands War. Another institutional choice where the decision wasn't wrong in isolation, but becomes indefensible when the fleet it depended on never materialized. One more. The Catobar question. The UK originally considered switching the Queen Elizabeth class from STOVL, short takeoff and vertical landing, using F-35Bs and the ski jump, to Catobar configuration with catapults and arresting gear. On paper, the case was compelling. A Catobar carrier could operate the F-35C, which has a combat radius of approximately 1,100 nautical miles, compared to roughly 750 for the F-35B. That's a roughly 40% increase in reach, which in operational terms means a carrier can launch strikes from further away, staying outside the range of more enemy weapons. The F-35C also carries a heavier weapons payload internally, with a larger internal weapons bay compared to the F-35B's more restrictive internal capacity. And the unit cost difference is significant. The F-35C has consistently come in cheaper per airframe than the F-35B. But the real loss wasn't the fighter. It was the airborne early warning aircraft. A Catobar carrier could have operated the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, a fixed-wing aircraft carrying the mechanically rotating AN/APY-9 radar, capable of detecting and tracking targets at ranges exceeding 300 nautical miles, while simultaneously managing intercepts across the entire strike group's airspace. Instead, the Royal Navy ended up with the Merlin Crow's Nest helicopter system, a Merlin helicopter carrying the Crow's Nest radar package. It flies lower, slower, for shorter duration, with a correspondingly smaller detection horizon. Crow's Nest is better than nothing, but it's not in the same operational universe as Hawkeye, and any honest assessment of carrier group air defense has to acknowledge that gap. In 2012, the government reversed the Catobar decision and stuck with Stovall. The catapult conversion costs had spiralled well beyond initial estimates. The price of doing it right had become too high, so they chose to save money and accept reduced capability. Sound familiar? It's the same institutional pattern. Build something impressive, then cut the things around it that would make it truly formidable. Crow's Nest instead of Hawkeye, F-35B instead of F-35C, and a dozen Escorts instead of 32. Pattern after pattern after pattern. The defence budget tells the rest of the story. UK defence spending drifted steadily downward from approximately 2.7% of GDP in the late 1990s, touching the NATO 2% guideline only intermittently through the 2000s and 2010s. A figure that itself is widely considered inadequate for a nation with Britain's global commitments and ambitions. Building 2 carriers at a combined cost of over £6 billion consumed a massive share of the naval equipment budget during a period when that budget was simultaneously being squeezed by Treasury efficiency demands. Something had to give. What gave was everything else. Escort orders were reduced, frigate numbers fell, auxiliary ship replacements were deferred. The carriers ate the budget, and the escorts that were supposed to protect them were the meal. The 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review made it worse. Conducted under the pressure of austerity following the global financial crisis, SDSR 2010 was brutal for the surface fleet. It was the review that confirmed a force of just 19 destroyers and frigates, well below the 32 that the 1998 review had established as the minimum, without revising the global commitment list downward to match. The Navy received fewer ships, but was given no fewer tasks, and the review set the conditions for the escort decline that followed. Fleet targets were set, and then systematically underfunded. The pattern didn't start in 2010, of course, but it accelerated. Here's where I want to land on this. The Queen Elizabeth class are not the problem. These are genuinely world-class warships, the most capable surface combatants the Royal Navy has ever operated, designed and built by British workers in British shipyards, proven on operational deployment. They deserve the fleet around them. They were supposed to have it. What they got instead was a surface escort force that has been halved since the year 2000. Replacement frigates arriving years late, and air defence destroyers hobbled by propulsion defects that have taken hulls out of the operational fleet for extended periods to address. The failure isn't engineering, it isn't seamanship, it isn't the sailors or the ships. It's institutional. It's a treasury that treated escort procurement as a bill to be deferred rather than a capability to be maintained. It's strategic reviews that set fleet targets and then never funded them. It's a political establishment that wanted the prestige of carrier aviation without paying for the unsexy frigates and destroyers that make carrier aviation survivable. The question was never whether these carriers are worth having. They are. China knows it. Every serious naval power on Earth knows it. The question is whether Britain will build the fleet to prove it. If this kind of analysis is what you're after, the stuff other videos skip, subscribe. There's more coming.